Your boy is coming at you yet again with the goods in this. It's a complete defending tutorial for EAFC 24. But let's be honest, this is our year. This is the year that we're going to hit 100,000 subscribers. I know it. I have faith. If you haven't yet subbed, what are you doing? I'm dropping tutorials day in, day out throughout the year of EAFC 24, as well as an RTG series. This channel's been up and running for 7 years now. It's our year, baby. It's our year. So hit the sub button, smash the like button, and let's get into it. First and foremost, I think it's important we delve into some custom tactics, player instructions, and formations that you guys should be using in EAFC 24. Now, I'm not going to give you guys specific formations or tactics. The simple reason for this is because what works for me will not work for you. You need to adjust your tactics based on what suits your game style. But what I will give you is recommendations for certain formations that you guys should use, as well as tactics and a general baseline for you guys to go off. Now, in terms of formations, I 100% recommend a formation with 2 CDMs as your base. We're talking 4-4-2 deep. We're talking the 4-2-3-1 either variation. We're talking the 4-3-3, but with 2 CDMs. And the reason for this is because having those 2 CDMs in the front of your 4 back line, because essentially the 2 CDMs act as a pivot point in the midfield. They drop back, they defend, and then they're able to push forward and counter once you've won the ball back. It not only will solidify your defensive line, but also your midfield as well, where you're able to control it both in the attack and in the defense. Now, in terms of custom tactics and instructions, one thing you're going to take away from this complete defending tutorial for EAFC is that I am a very big advocate of manual defending and teaching you guys how to defend manually so you don't have to rely on the AI. And let's face it, pro players in the higher tier divisions, they aren't utilizing the AI to defend against high caliber attackers. They're defending manually, and that's what I'm here to teach you today. So I recommend not having constant pressure, not having pressure after possession loss, and not having pressure after heavy touch. You should have these things on balanced so that you guys can learn how to adapt manually with the defense and not utilize or rely on the AI. And in terms of instructions, I do recommend having your wingbacks and your CDMs or midfielders on stay back while attacking. It just gives you that little bit of extra depth when it comes to defending. You won't be as susceptible to the counter attack if they're staying back. Now, in terms of depth and width, that really is something you guys need to adjust to your liking. But as a baseline, I think it's rather necessary to mention that any depth over 45 will activate a team press animation, where essentially your whole team will press higher up the pitch. To prevent this and stick to the strategy of what I'm going to teach you throughout this tutorial in terms of keeping the defensive shape and not giving up too many holes or gaps in the defense, then I highly recommend you guys keeping your depth below 45. Again, it's something for you guys to play around with and essentially adjust it to your liking. Now is when it starts. The defending basics. A lot of you guys may know this, but I think it's necessary for a complete defending tutorial to delve into this. Of course, tackle is the circle button on PS5 or B on Xbox, and you can also have a quick tackle as well. That is with R1. This basically allows your defender to quickly stick his leg out a lot quicker and a lot less powerful compared to a regular standing tackle that you may even hold it up and have him lunge a little bit more. The R1 tackle technique is a quick tackle. It lunges in very quickly, but it may not be as strong on the ball when you're going for it. We then have contain. No, it's not back. It's not something you guys should rely on, but I remember back in the day, we're talking FIFA 12, 13, 14 days. Contain was my savior, but that was back in the day. I was a casual player, not a pro player, and yeah, it really didn't do me any good. Contain is essentially you holding the X button on PS5 or A on Xbox, and the AI will briefly contain and follow the movement of the attack on the ball, but it's not reliable. You should not use this, but I thought I'd better mention it in this video. We then have second man press. Okay, this entails you guys incorporating a second defender in with your defense. So you have the player you control, and the second closest player to that player you're controlling will be the second man presser. with R1 or RB, that is. So you hold R1 on PS5 or RB on Xbox, and that second closest defender to the ball carrier will press the ball carrier. This is essentially helpful when you're wanting to track a run or squeeze the opponent off the ball, but we'll get into that a little bit later. We then have jockey, which of course is L2 or LT on Xbox. However, what I will say about that is the standard regular jockeying technique in EAFC is not the greatest by itself. What is good is the speed jockey technique, but it's a tap technique, and I will get into that a little bit later. But as I said, this is the basics. Essentially, jockey is L2, but you can activate speed jockey, which is with R2, and that's by holding both L2 and R2 together, or LT and RT together, and that activates speed jockey, which is a quicker version of the L2 jockey standard variation. We then have slide tackle, which of course is square on PS5 and it's on Xbox. Accompanying that is as well the R1 variation. You hold R1 and press the slide tackle button. What it is a crunching tackle, which was brought to us last year in FIFA 23. And essentially the player will clear the ball a lot more when he goes in for a crunching tackle compared to if you're defending normally and you do a regular slide tackle. The ball won't go as far away from the challenge. We then have, of course, player switching. That's L1 for the regular standard player switching technique, or LB on Xbox. What that does is select the second closest player to the ball carrier at that time, okay? Because you might be closer with another defender and then it will select the second closest defender. But at times, that won't be the right defender to select and not the defender that you exactly want. And that's where right stick switching comes in. Right stick switching, there's going to be a larger, more in-depth segment coming up, but is essentially you guys flicking the right stick towards the player that you want. And that is the technique that you guys are going to want to learn, especially if you're going to take one thing from this defending tutorial. Please take the right stick switching segments into consideration. We then have tactical versus advanced defending. There's been a debate at the moment of which setting is more viable to use in terms of defending in EAFC 24. To sum it up, tactical defending is more manual than advanced defending. When it comes to tactical defending, you're still using your regular jockey techniques of L2R2 and you're manually deciding which tackle to use in each situation. But what I will say about this is you are missing out on various animations which have been added in with Hypermotion 2. Come off the hour, come off the setting. Lo and behold, advanced defending. Now, as a disclaimer, I will say that every technique that I have shown you in this defending tutorial does involve tactical defending. That is so I can show you how to do each and every technique raw without implementing advanced defending, because every technique I've taught you in this defending tutorial will be necessary in various situations. But with advanced defending, you can tap down on the pass button, which is X on PS5 or A on Xbox, and what it will do is activate shrugging animations for your defender to shrug the player off the ball or get his body in between the ball and the attacker. And what I found is if you are having trouble locking on to defenders this year, when it comes to tapping down on that X or A button, the player will lock on to the attacker on the ball and you won't have to line him up at all. Now you do need to be within, let's say, a 1 or 2 meter radius for him to start locking on, but once he locks on, he will put his body on the line and shrug the defender off the ball. That's where we move into the X/circle technique, which I have discovered in the AFC. If you use this animation where you tap down on the X button and he locks on to the attacker, you can then subsequently press the tackle button just as the defender gets near the attacker. This will cause him to not only lock on to the ball, but he will also get a tackle in, which makes this even more overpowered. So in my opinion, after using both settings, it is highly recommended that you do utilize advanced defending when it comes to attempting to get tackles in EAFC. Right, Now the boring stuff is out of the way, it's time to jump into how to tackle. Now this is something that is super important. If you tackle too early, the player will lunge in because timing is key. And essentially if you tackle too early, the player you're defending with will lunge too early and leave a gap in space for the attacker to exploit, and he will overall lose momentum. If you do it too late, of course, you're more susceptible to drawing a foul. But if you go in and you're around that 1 meter radius from the attacker, this is a good time to do so. Now you do need to line him up, and that's where jockeying comes in, and I'm going to get into jockeying very shortly, but tackling entails timing. Essentially being around that 1 meter in-game radius is a good area to tackle, and if you're even closer but you feel as though you've overreacted a little bit too much and a regular tackle would essentially take too long to do, this is when you can implement the quick tackle, which is R1, as I said before. Moving into jockeying, and this is where tackling comes into play, because good jockeying is key to executing a good tackle. When it comes to jockeying, L2 by itself is way too slow. You cannot react to the movement of your attacker. And that means that when you're close to an attacker and he does a skill move or a dribble, you won't be able to react. What does work is speed jockey, but there is a certain technique that I like to use that I have kept secret from my coaching academy, which you can get coaching from me, by the way, one-on-one. The link to that is down below. But essentially, speed jockey technique entails holding R2 and L2 at the same time, or RT and LT. That activates speed jockey, and what happens is you're able to adjust and adapt to the movements of the attacker every time you do this, which is the greatest thing about it. But what I've found is, in comparison to FIFA 23 and EAFC 24, is speed jockey and regular jockey isn't the greatest. But what I've noticed is the tap technique, which I created, as I said before, where you're holding L2 but you tap continuously the R2 button to activate both regular jockey and speed jockey intermediately together, and intertwining them together is the greatest technique. And the reason why is because you're able to adjust a lot more to the movements of the player on the ball. I find speed jockey with the left stick movements as you're jockeying doesn't allow you to move that quickly, and as I said, L2 by itself is way too slow as well. But this technique where you're tapping it allows you to adjust, and they sort of get more of an agile adjustment to the defender when you use this technique. And I find I'm able to maneuver and adjust and read the movements of my attacker a lot better compared to just using sprint jockey, or L2 and R2 jockey as they call it, the sprint jockey technique by itself. We'll then move on to left stick movement with jockey. Now, as I've said, L2 and R2 is a lot more quicker compared to regular jockeying, which means you can at times be susceptible to overcommitting because of how touchy the left stick is with jockeying. The same goes for the tap technique. And what you're essentially wanting to bear in mind when you're jockeying is the amount of pressure you're putting on the left stick. If you're too aggressive with the left stick, you're more susceptible to overcommitting with the defender. But if you're very light and you're touching it very lightly as so, okay, and you're maneuvering it so it doesn't click all the way, you hear that clicking, but instead it's just a very light touch to line up with the defender, then I find you don't overcommit as much when jockeying, and that's the biggest mistake people make, is overcommitting. So the tap technique together with your movement on the left stick will help you line up defenders a lot better with the attacker. We then have L2 to stabilize with jockeying. Now this is a technique, essentially when you are sprinting along, catching up to an attacker, you can use L2 to stabilize, to just give you that certain time to essentially read where the opponent's going to go, because you don't want to overcommit. If you just hold sprint by itself, at times you will then run past the attacker after he's done that skill move or dribble. But incorporating L2 to stabilize the defender allows you to just buy yourself some time and adjust to what the attacker is going to do. So that is a natural technique itself. Briefly use L2 to slow down slightly and then continue sprinting on again. The approach, back off, and approach technique. This is a technique that I also kept secret for quite some time in my coaching academy for the people that were getting one-on-one coaching with me. But I have released it last year and I'm going to release it again this year. But essentially that technique entails you guys approaching the attacker on the ball, then backing off slightly to buy yourself some time and adjust to what his movement's going to be, and then approaching again. You see a lot of people, they just dive in. They go in straight away okay, and they don't actually buy themselves time to react and adjust to the skill move or the dribble that the opponent is doing. This kills them. You need to approach, then back off slightly as you're using L2 and R2 jockey technique, and then reapproach. The back off buys you time to see what he's going to do, because at times when you approach the attacker on the ball, what's he going to do? He's either going to perform a skill move or he's going to dribble some way. So you guys will be able to essentially buy yourself time to see what he does to react to your approach, and then you can approach again. What it does is essentially allows you to avoid overcommitting. The zigzag jockey technique, another one I'm releasing from my coaching academy. Why am I doing this? Now, as I said, you can get coaching from me one-on-one. There's a lot of techniques I don't share. This is another one though, it's a zigzag technique, and a lot of people have trouble lining up defenders with the attacker because they go in with the jockey technique and essentially they just run straight past and overcommit and leave a gap in the space. The zigzag technique entails you guys moving slightly back and forth. A zigzag movement on the left stick, which allows you to line your defender up with the attacker. It's a movement like this, slightly back and forth, slightly back and forth. And you're not moving the left stick all the way. As I said, you're very minute on the movement of the stick. That's why I said in the basics segment that it's important you're very light on your touches on the stick. And this is where zigzag jockeying comes in. You're maneuvering back and forth so that if the attacker goes left, you're ready to go left. If the attacker goes right, you're ready to go right, because your thumb's movements are continuously moving, which means it's gonna be ready to react to the movement of the attacker. And that's the zigzag technique. It avoids you from overcommitting, and it also helps you guys with your reaction speed, because your thumb is ready to adjust and adapt to the attacker. Stand tackling. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, hang on, why is he doing a segment on this? It seems pretty simple and basic, but it's not. And I want to tell you a story simply because in FIFA 20, essentially there was a technique that the community adapted to, and that was not pressing tackle when they lined up the defender with the attacker. And that's because penalties were easy to give away back in FIFA 20. Come FIFA 21, 22, 23, and now in EAFC 24, people and the community itself still have that habit. They go in and they don't press tackle, and this is the biggest mistake I see. It's not FIFA 20 anymore. Tackles do work, and you won't give away penalties as easily as long as you line them up. You need to press tackle when you go in for the tackle. You cannot just rely on the jockey technique itself. A lot of people just rely on the jockey technique itself, and you won't come out of the tackle cleanly. You need to press tackle so that you can come out with the ball as you go in for it. Now, as I was saying, the best time to tackle itself is as you're around that 1 meter radius to the attacker. Now, as I said, the technique that you use for tackling, whether it's the R1 quick tackle technique or whether it's a regular tackle technique, really depends how far you are away. If you're too close to them and you think you might overcommit, if you do a regular tackle because it takes longer to execute, use R1. But if you're using, the regular tackle technique, you're wanting to be around 1 meter radius from that attacker. And if you're even further away, you can hold the tackle button down, and that gives a more lungier tackle, but you are more susceptible to losing momentum and overcommitting if you do mistime it, so be sure to watch out for that. Now moving into slide tackling. Now, it's definitely a very viable technique to defending, and there are many times when I do slide when it's necessary, but I think the word necessary there is very key. A lot of people will spam slide. They will attempt to get the ball back by sliding the majority of the time. Please do not do this. It needs to have purpose. You need to slide in tackles when they are calculated, because if you don't, you're going to leave gaps in space and you will lose momentum with the defender since they're on the ground and they have to get back up. The times that you want to slide tackle are essentially when the touch is very large, or when you need to make a game-saving sliding tackle or a goal-saving sliding tackle. Okay, and usually it reverts back to the touch that the opponent has taken, and usually this is when they're sprinting. When your opponent is sprinting, you can dive on that tackle by slide tackling. Okay, you want to ensure that the touch is large. You don't want to be slide tackling when your opponent has full control of the attacker, because he can turn away easily as you're going for that tackle, and you will sometimes get cards, even red cards, and then you're down to 10 men, which is another story. So avoid slide tackling, especially spamming it, and only do it when it's calculated, which is generally when the touch is large. We then have to move on into tactical fouls. You're probably thinking, why is he teaching this? But it's a tactic. I'm telling you, if there are times, let's say in the 90th, when the opponent is countering you, and you have that opportunity to take an attacker out on the ball as he's progressing forward, do so. It can save you a goal. There is something called the 90th minute glitch, where there is more time for your opponent to score and momentum can shift. Make sure you do your tactical fouls. It is very important. I know I said you shouldn't be sliding unless it's calculated, but we're talking about times when this could actually make you win the game. There are times when your opponent is countering you. Slide, take him out, and take the card. Pros are doing this, so it's very important. The crunching tackle, as I said, brought to us last year in FIFA 23, and it's very useful. If there are times when, let's say, you are the last man standing as the defender, and there are no other defenders in sight, and you're one-on-one with that attacker, and if he beats you, he's got a clear shot on goal. The best strategy here is to try and clear the ball away as far as you can. So using R1 slide tackle, which is the crunching tackle, will benefit you in this situation, because let's say you use a regular slide tackle. The ball won't go off as far away, which means it might actually be cleaned up. The crumbs from the tackle will be cleaned up by another attacker near the player on the ball, which will then leave you susceptible to conceding. But if you can clear that ball away and you are the last man standing, the tactical slide tackle can be the most viable way of slide tackling in these situations. We'll now move on into tracking runs. Now, this is one of the most significant aspects of your defense. If you don't track, you will concede counter attacks, and it's the biggest mistake I see for especially people just getting into my coaching academy and receiving one-on-one coaching from me. They don't track runs, which leaves them more susceptible to conceding counter attacks. You need a track, and this incorporates right stick switching, because if you use just L1 switching, you will not be able to select the defender closest to the player making the run upfield. It'll only select the closest player to the ball for you, and that's why right stick switching is so important, and the segment to that is coming up very shortly. But essentially, when tracking runs, you want to spot the runner, right stick switch to the defender near him, and then you want to start running alongside him. Now, at the same time, hold R1, which is the second man press technique, so that you can press the ball carrier whilst you track. This is important because it essentially allows you to multitask. You're able to track the run as well as put pressure onto the ball carrier. Now, it is very important with tracking runs that you run directly backwards, and tracking, to sum it up in a T, is all about momentum. If you keep the maximum momentum of your defender, you will have no trouble defending a runner, defending a counter attack, defending a through ball. But if you're zigzagging around or you're jockeying, attempting to track him, and you're not running directly backwards just with sprint, you will lose momentum, and a lot of the time the attacker can outrun you. But if we're sprinting directly backwards, the angle of the run is towards the goal so that you can get in between the goal and the attacker receiving the ball, then you'll have no trouble losing momentum, and essentially you'll be able to defend that through ball. We then have to move on into second man press, since we just mentioned it in the tracking segment. Now, when it comes to second man press, as I said, you hold R1 or RB if you're in 8 spots, and it can be super useful, especially in various defending situations. Now, if I'm going to summarize second man press this year, it's actually very effective. What I've noticed is EA have actually incorporated a third defender with this. Although the green arrow above the second player isn't showing on the third player, what I've noticed is EA have basically incorporated a third man into the press, which is very beneficial for those who know how to right stick switch, because as you're pressing the ball carrier, there will be 3 defenders around them, and you can constantly switch between the 3 of them to squeeze the opponent off the ball. But that's for another day. What I will say though is, second man press, to summarize it, is super effective and we need to use it. A tip though I want to make very clear with second man press is, when you're second man pressing with that defender, it is so important that you guys manually select the defender as he gets near that attacker to make the tackle. It's not FIFA 22, where you could rely on second man press to make the tackle for you. It's very similar to last year in 23, when you're near him with the second man presser and you need to make that tackle, use L1 to select the second man pressure, and as I said, L1 selection selects the closest player to the ball, which means it would be the second man presser, especially if you're controlling another defender. Use L1, select that defender, and make the tackle manually. I said, and I'll say it again, you cannot rely on AI to make the tackle for you. You need to do it manually. So as he approaches with a second man press and he gets close, select him and make the tackle. Now I did briefly go into it when it came to tracking, but I wanted to make a separate segment on this. You do need to use second man press when you track. Otherwise, who's going to press the ball carrier as you're tracking that run? He's going to have too much time and space to exploit in the midfield as he's pushing up the field. So it's so important that we focus on tracking and pressing the ball carrier rather than just doing one at a time. Now, when it comes to second man pressing, you can be susceptible to leaving gaps in space in the defense. That's simply because if you hold it down and it brings your central midfielder or defender from the center out wide to press the ball carrier out wide, then what's that do? It leaves gaps in space exploitable in the middle of the pitch, which you do not want. So a standard rule that you guys want to keep in your defensive locker is when you're second man pressing, always second man press with the outside defender and not with the inside defender. So you want to have control of the inside defender, and what that will do is use the closest player to the ball to second man press. As I said, second man press is the second closest player to the ball that you have control of. If you're controlling the inner defender and you use second man press, it will most likely select the outside defender, who will then press the outside attacker. This goes for when the attacker's on the wing, especially on the wing, because if you use second man press and you're controlling the outside wing back, it will select the centre back and drag him out of the position, leaving a gap in space to exploit. So avoid this. Remember this rule, only second man press with the outside defender. We then have partial team press, brought to us last year in FIFA 23, and it actually is super useful, but not as many people used it last year, and I don't know why. Same as goes for myself, I usually just forgot that it actually existed and I just preferred to manually defend. But what I will say about partial team press is it's so effective because what you can do is you can press the outside attacker with an outside defender and have the two inner defenders track the inside passing options, which gives your opponent less options to exploit. And that's what it does. Partial team press basically takes the two closest defenders to the defender that you control and makes them mark the two closest attackers to the ball carrier. And where this can be useful is when your opponent is on the wing. Because when your opponent's on the wing, they're trying to look for a central pass. So what you can do is it's the opposite movement or motion to the regular second man press. You can select the outside defender and then have your two inner defenders closest to the outside defender cover the inside passing options, and then you can manually go in and tackle the outside attacker. It is so useful. But then I have the disclaimer. Do not use this if you are defending in the center of the pitch and your opponent is in the middle attacking, because what will happen is it will take your two closest defenders to the control defender, which is usually your midfielder, and make them mark attackers around, which then causes your defenders to go away from their holes and their gaps, which leaves gaps in space for the opponent to exploit. It will drive them out of their position and it will leave too many holes in your defense. So only use this as a key to defending when your opponent is on the wing. Never should you use this when your opponent is in the center of the pitch. We'll then move on into player switching. My God, this is going to be a long segment, but it's probably the most important segment and the most significant to increasing your defensive ability. When it comes to player switching, it's so important that we learn right sit switching. I said this before, simply because L1 switching by itself does not cut it. It only selects the closest player to the ball. Right sit switching entails you guys using the right stick to flick to a defender from the defender that you have already selected as a pivot point, which is a great time to now delve into the settings, which I will basically explain before we get into the nitty gritty of right sit switching. You guys need to have in your settings player relative, not ball relative. And don't you dare argue with me in the comment section down below saying that ball relative is better. And the reason why is because what is the purpose of right sit switching? It's to select any defender on the pitch that we like, so that we can track, so that we can press, so that we can squeeze the opponent or anticipate the opponent. If it's on ball relative, it uses the ball as the pivot point from who you select with the right stick. When the ball is on the pitch, who's around the ball? Maximum 4 to 5 defenders. The rest are scattered around the pitch. Can we select, let's say, the right back if the ball's on the left side of the pitch to track the left winger if necessary? No, we can't. That's why player relative is super important, because I can select any defender around the defender that I have selection of, not the ball. So if I want to select the right back, I can flick twice. Let's say from the left wing to the midfielder and then from the midfielder to the right back. This allows me to track anyone on the pitch, okay, and select anyone on the pitch. And I stand by this to this day. Do not use ball relative, use player relative. Now, I am going to have a more in-depth right sit switching complete guide on the channel coming up in the next couple of weeks. But what I want to say about right sit switching is there are around 5 stages to you guys learning right sit switching. It's learning right sit switching as the basic. It's then tracking runs. It's then anticipating your opponent. It's then squeezing him off the ball. And then the 5th and final stage, the more advanced stage, is your ability to control your whole defense and keep your defensive shape. 5 stages. Let's get into them. The first stage is learning it. Now, this is going to take time. The biggest issue people have with right sit switching is their ability to get the angles correct. You need to get the angles correct, otherwise you will keep miss-switching defenders, and this will take a very long time to learn. Right sit switching took me 6 years to perfect. And for you guys, it's going to take you just as long. Now, what I will say is people who have got one-on-one coaching with me, it's only taken them around 6 months to 12 months because they've done it with my help. I was alone, and this is the thing. Now, you guys might take less, but basically it has taken me this long to perfect it. Now, when it comes to learning it, I recommend going into kickoff, selecting the difficulty to beginner, and essentially just continuing to switch and select defenders that you want. This is so important. You need to get the angles down pat to at least 80% accuracy so that you can start implementing this into your game. Once you've got this down pat, now is when we move on into tracking runs, the second stage. Now, when it comes to tracking runs, what you want to focus on is looking for the runners. So be less tunnel visioned and always be looking around at your defenders and where they are and what attackers are making runs. When you do spot runners, you need to track them. So you use the right stick to flick towards the defender closest to the attacker making the run and start running alongside him. This is super important, as I said. As you're doing this, you're second man pressing the ball carrier. This is very, very important. We then move on into the third stage, and that's anticipating the opponent. This is quite advanced and it will take you a very long time to basically implement into your defensive game. But what this entails is you guys essentially selecting the defender before the opponent even makes a pass to cut off a pass that you believe he's going to make. It's called anticipation. And you'll find yourself in a lot of these situations. Let's say a passing lane opens up from the midfield to the striker, showing for the ball. You know your opponent's going to hit that striker's feet, so you select the centre back with the right stick to cut that off instantaneously and basically give your opponent no options. This will take time, but you will find yourself in many situations where you know your opponent's going to pass and you will be able to use the right stick to select the defender, cut the pass off and intercept the ball before he even makes the pass. We then have the fourth stage, and that is squeezing the opponent. Now, as I was saying before with second man press, it's been advanced this year to the point where it actually incorporates a third defender, and I like this. Now, you don't actually see the arrow, as I said, but I do notice a third defender is incorporated, which means we can use second man press to our advantage and our ability to right sit switch. You can continuously switch between all 3 defenders, wrapping around the attacker on the ball, and use the right stick to do so. You can run the first one up, then switch to the second defender, keep running towards the ball carrier, and as you switch off, because you're second man press, the first defender you selected originally will be running towards the ball carrier, and it will incorporate the third defender, who you can then select as well to wrap around and squeeze the opponent. You can even do this with 4 players, and I've done this before, but essentially you want to continuously switch between the 3 defenders with your right stick once you've got the angles down pat, of course, because as I said, this will take a very long time to use and adapt and basically implement into your game, but you will be able to squeeze the opponent off the ball with right stick switching and second man press. The final stage, the more advanced, is your ability to essentially select all your defenders at once, and I'm talking you're switching off a defender every 1 or 2 seconds to another defender to make sure that you have full control of your defense and keeping that defensive shape. You see, a lot of people, they just control one defender and they run up towards the ball carrier. What that does is leaves a huge gap and space for the opponent to exploit where you ran that defender out of. But if we can get to the point where we learn how to switch between multiple defenders at once and we're running up towards the ball carrier but not dragging them out of position and essentially just switching between all of our defenders at once to keep the shape, this will allow us to have a very solid and structured defense. And at the same time, you're anticipating, you might be running up slightly with a midfielder, then switching to the other midfielder, running up slightly, then switching to your left wing, running up slightly to keep that line, keep that shape, and then you might instantly switch to the centre back because you do notice a passing lane straight from the midfield into the attacker showing for the ball, and you cut that off. This is what I mean, you're continuously switching between your defenders, the midfielders, the defenders, all of your defenders, to then keep the shape and keep that tight structure and squeeze the opponent off the ball. Basically, give him no options. Now, I wanted to add in a bit of a disclaimer segment or a bit of a last tip for you guys. Now, if you do miss switch, now we're not all perfect, you may have perfected right stick switching. However, as I said, we're not all perfect. There will be times when you miss switch and you're not sure who you've actually selected as the pivot point. It's important that we use L1 in this situation. I use L1 probably 10% of my switches and the rest are right stick switching. So it's a 90% to 10% ratio, whereas a lot of people in the community, it's just a 10% to 90% ratio. You can use L1 to reset, and this is the reset technique. If you miss switch and you don't know where you are, just use L1. You can reset, select the closest defender to the ball carrier, and yeah, essentially then you can go from there. Defending in the final third. Now, this is a separate segment, but essentially it incorporates the 5th stage of right stick switching. It is so important that when you are in that final third, you're not dragging any of your defenders out of their position. You're limiting your use of second man press because obviously that drags defenders out, and you're constantly switching between your defense to keep the shape and keep the line. And you're slightly pushing up with each defender, then switching off to another one, slightly pushing up, switching off to another one. That keeps the shape, but at the same time, that little bit of a run up that you do puts pressure onto the ball carrier. And this is what you're wanting to do in the final third. When he's trying to play around your 18-yard box and you're defending this, keep switching between your midfielders to squeeze up and keep the wall, keep the line, and don't give them any gaps in space to exploit. That is so important to defending in the final third. And when they get that pass into the striker, you need to select the centre back to face up. If you don't, you will be in trouble, because if you give your opponent too much time on the ball in the box, you will concede. So now move on into team press. Now obviously this is on the D-pad, you're pressing down and to the side to activate team press. Now with this technique, essentially your defense will AI defend and they will press the opponent on the ball, and this can be useful, let's say when your opponent is in his own half. I highly recommend not using this when your opponent gets into your half, because if you use team press, it will leave too many gaps and spaces and you will be too fragmented. You actually won't know where you can switch or who defenders are where, because essentially they're everywhere. Only use team press when you're attempting to squeeze the opponent off the ball in their own half, but at that stage, I think you guys really should try and focus on trying to use right stick switching anyway. Start learning how to manually squeeze your opponent off the ball, and you won't need to worry about where your defenders are or losing track of where they are on the pitch because you're pressing them manually. We'll then move on into certain tactics. Now, what did I say in the opening segment? Please avoid pressure after possession loss, pressure after heavy touch, or constant pressure. I did say this, and as a general basis, you should. But there will be times in the game when that help of the AI will allow you to get the ball back a little bit quicker and put a lot more pressure onto your opponent. I only recommend using pressure after possession loss or pressure after heavy touch in a situation where you're between the 60th and 80th minute and you're down. This is a good time to use these because it won't fully allow your defense to press the opponent, but it will allow you to put more pressure onto the opponent. We then move into constant pressure. I recommend if you're down using this from the 80th minute to the 90th minute. This activates your AI to go full constant pressure and put pressure onto the ball carrier. Yes, this can be helpful, I will admit. You can use it in this situation, but I really and highly recommend you guys not using it in any other minutes because you should really be focusing on manually squeezing the opponent and manually pressing and only resorting to the AI in times when you're in dire need of a goal. Learn to manually press so that you don't have to worry about stamina issues as well towards the end of the game, because if you use constant pressure or pressure after possession loss from the start, your stamina on your team will be lost. We'll then move into keeper movement. Of course, to do this, you're just pressing down on the right stick and maneuvering with the keeper. This controls the keeper, which allows us to try and anticipate where the opponent's going to shoot, and it can be super useful as a last dire stretch need to save that goal. And I think it is necessary to move into clearing the ball. Now, this is super important because when people are defending, specifically in aerial battles, when they're in the 18-yard box, whether that's from a corner or from across from the opponent, they will spam the pass button, and unfortunately this doesn't cut it because the pass button doesn't activate the clearing animations that EA have added in with Hypermotion 2 to the defenders. You need to press clear, which is circle on PS5 or B on Xbox. It's the shoot button. What this does is activate the clearing animation of your defender to clear the ball, and they will do everything necessary, everything possible to rise above the attacker and try and clear that ball. The same goes when it's a scramble in the 18-yard box. Get used to clearing the ball, not passing out, because when you pass out, you're more susceptible to losing the ball and giving it up in a vulnerable area. Yes, I used to do this personally. I think everyone does this when they start out. You start and pass out and spam the pass button to clear it. Start using clear. Just start telling yourself a mental note, I need to clear the ball when it's in the box because otherwise I'll be susceptible. Then you will get into the habit of clearing it like I eventually did years ago. But then move into blocking shots, and this is important because there will be times when you are controlling the defender in the box and approaching for a tackle is not the best choice to do at that time because you're too far away and you know that your opponent's going to shoot. This is when we need to line up the defender with the post that is essentially the most desired, which is normally the far post. And when you're in the box, your opponent's got a good shooting opportunity. Make sure you select that centre back and make sure you line up with him. You can use and implement certain techniques, including the zigzag technique, including the tap technique, to ensure that you are lining up that defender with the shot. So just take one tip from this segment, and that is you need to select the defender to face up with the attacker who has received the ball in the box. So then move into cutting passing lanes, and this does go in with the 5th stage of right sit switching, but essentially that's what that entails, is you constantly switching between your defenders to cover all passing lanes at once and anticipate, which is the 3rd stage of right sit switching, and that is selecting defenders to cut passes off before the opponent even does so. It's no use just controlling one defender and running them between all the passing lanes. You need to select between most of them. And essentially to do that, it's with right sit switching, and that's why I said to you from the beginning, right sit switching is something that will increase your defense by 10-fold, and it is the most significant aspect of your defense when it comes to defending because it is so applicable to all defending techniques in the game. The cover and approach technique incorporates the jockeying techniques that I told you, and essentially your ability not to overcommit. But it also incorporates the zigzag jockeying technique more specifically, and that is because the cover and approach technique entails you guys covering a passing lane but at the same time approaching the ball carrier. And this will be in times when you're defending counterattacks or when you're defending around your 18-yard box area. There will be times when there is a passing option and you need to cover that, but you also need to put pressure onto the ball carrier because you have limited defending options. This is when you want to essentially cover the pass, but slowly zigzag movement approach the attacker on the ball so that you can run approach him, force him to make a mistake and put pressure onto him, but at the same time covering the pass so that he can't get the pass off into the attacker. This will take practice, but in times when you're in dire need of defending options and you need to cover a pass but also pressure the ball carrier at the same time, be sure to do the cover and approach technique. We'll then move on to defending skill moves, and this actually is very similar to the technique that I taught you before of the approach, back off, and approach technique. You need to buy yourself time when it comes to skill moves. And any time that you approach an attacker on the ball, it's a good indication that he will perform a skill move to beat you. And to basically anticipate this, you need to approach, then back off slightly with L2 and R2 jockey, and then approach again with L2 and R2 jockey. Because this will buy you time to read where the opponent will go with the skill move. And this is so important because if you don't buy yourself time, you will be susceptible to biting and leaving a gap in space for the opponent to exploit after he has performed the skill moves. So the significant aspect of defending skill moves is buying yourself time, and it's with that technique. Shutting down long shots. Now, it should come second nature to you, and you shouldn't really give your opponent too much time on the ball to do a long shot if you're very good at right sit switching and the fifth stage. But there will be times when the opponent is outside the box and you need to pressure him. You cannot give your opponent time on the ball outside the box. It's the same as inside the box. Any time they have, it gives them enough time to get a shot off and hit that long shot. When you are defending, be sure to put pressure onto the ball carrier and give him no time on the ball, whether that's inside the box or outside the box. And that's my tip to defending long shots. Don't give them time on the ball. Approach them with the zigzag technique and don't give them time on the ball. But if they take a long shot, that's where the tip comes in. Be sure to press the tackle button because this activates the block motion or animation for your defender to get in front of the shot and stop the shot. Pouncing on the opponent. I love this technique because you can basically entice your opponent into losing the ball by controlling the defender, covering the passing lane, and then transitioning bang as they take the large touch. Now, if you give your opponent enough space in the midfield, he will genuinely sprint into that space, and even lower caliber and high caliber players both do this. If there's a lot of space, they will use the sprint button. This is when we should use the pounce technique, which incorporates you guys holding L2 and R2, covering some space or a passing lane, and then as he sprints off, pouncing by releasing L2 and running towards him with sprint to pounce instantaneously. And that's why I do like baiting my opponent at times. You can bait them into sprinting into the space by leaving that space, covering the pass, and then as soon as he does it, as soon as you anticipate that sprint into the hole, bang, you're off. Pounce on the opponent, slide tackle or stand tackle if you have enough time to get the ball back. Defending counter attacks. Now, the biggest mistake I see is people not running at the angle that will get them in between the goal and the attacker ASAP. This is so important. If they run directly towards the attacker on the ball, especially when you're attempting to recover in the defense in a counter-attacking situation, they will end up behind them because of the angle they're running. But if you run at a straight line back when defending a counter-attack, you will get in between the goal and the attacker to then face up with that attacker. You guys need to bear this in mind. It's so important that you remember this. When defending counterattacks and you're attempting to recover, run directly backwards. This gives you the most momentum and it gives you the best angle possible to get in between the goal and the attacker. Because if you run towards the attacker, you'll end up playing cat and mouse. Bringing centre backs out of position. You're probably thinking, why do I see pro players bring centre backs out of position? But when I do so, I leave gaps and holes and the opponent scores a goal. It is so important that You are bringing centre backs out of position if you are confident that you can recover in the defence and you're confident you can get the ball. And this is where incorporating pouncing on the opponent, anticipating the sprint comes in, because using your centre backs can be very, very helpful if you're quick at switching and approaching, and that's the technique. Switch and approach. If you give your opponent too much time on the ball and you're approaching with the centre back, you will leave a gap in space, but there will be times when, let's say, the opponent gets the ball into the striker, you can instantaneously select the centre back with your right stick and wrap around to get the tackle in. This is very important, and it is a good way of putting pressure onto the striker as he receives the ball. So I do recommend it, but only if you can recover in the defence and have the ability to do so. So you can bring centre backs out to pressure the opponent, but do so calculated and with purpose. And this incorporates the centre back press and track technique. If there is a time when the attacker on the ball is alone and the centre back you have selected can approach him, you should approach him, switch off to another defender and track any runners around whilst holding second man press. This puts pressure onto the ball carrier purposely, and it allows you to track and cut off any options that he has. It's a very good defending technique, very advanced, but will help you squeeze opponents off the ball when they get the ball into their attack. So there you have it. I'm gonna need a drink after this one. This one's a long one, but lads, I hope it helps you defend this year in the EAFC. I want to hit 100k for us. We've been on this channel for a very long time, grinding it out. If you haven't yet, subscribe. There's going to be tutorials day in, day out throughout the year. You guys will enjoy it, and you can support your boy. Smash the like button, and as always, I am coaching one-on-one, so if you want to be a part of that, the link is down below. I can coach you throughout this year and guide you into being the best FIFA player that you've ever been. But I'm out. Sayonara, au revoir, adios, salam ciao. Have a good one. And goodbye. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then I'd really appreciate it if you hit the subscribe button. And lastly, if you do want any pre-gaming fuel or supplement, then head over to atpscience.com, which is the first link in the description, and use the code DylanEtsATP at checkout to get yourself a discount. Not only is it the cheapest way to get supplements, but it helps me out a ton, guys, so thank you.